The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order! The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Dylan J. Schlender presiding. Will you all rise for the Honorable Judge Schlender?
Be seated. Welcome to Reels of Justice, Hell on Reels. Today we are hearing the case of the people versus The Last House on the Left, a 1972 exploitation horror film about a mother and father who decide to exact revenge against the four strangers who violated and murdered their daughter and her best friend. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of the sin of being a bad movie. If so, it shall be cast for all eternity into the fiery pits of movie hell, upon which this courthouse just so happens to be built. And before we continue any further, I want to inform our listeners that this trial will include discussions of sexual violence, and if this subject matter is at all triggering or difficult for you, we urge you to please go check out one of our other episodes. Now, Mr. Big Ben Hasslar, you are appearing on behalf of the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
The 70s. Home to the Grindhouse drive-thru feature, all promising a good time. One bad snuff film on the circuit, also promising a good time. Beware of The Last House on the Left. What began as a directorial cash grab ends in an endeavor neither actor nor screenwriter care to watch again. Just what did go wrong with The Last House on the Left? Those involved don't enjoy it. Every amateurish mistake is contained within it. Even outright lies to the public were perpetrated by it. To avoid sympathizing, keep repeating to yourself, it's only a bad movie. Only a bad movie. Only a bad movie. Last House on the Left.
I assume that's the trailer. I don't know. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. Listen, I'm excited for his case now after that trailer. So, thank you, Mr. Hasslar. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Robin Warder. Please present your opening statement.
Well, my name is Robin Warder, and I host a true crime podcast called The Trail Went Cold. And one of the reasons I selected this movie is that one of the most popular true crime podcasts in the genre, Last Podcast on the Left, was named directly after this movie. And I've watched this movie maybe 25 years ago, and it's definitely a very divisive one. It's made by Wes Craven of A Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream fame, and it was his debut, and it was also produced by Sean Cunningham, who directed the first Friday the 13th. So it's the creators of Freddy and Jason working together years before the fact to make a low-budget exploitation film. And by their own admission, they really didn't know what they were doing. They just wanted to make a film to break into the industry. But by pure accident, they broke a lot of new ground and broke a lot of taboos that had never been seen in cinema before. And the film wound up becoming a surprise hit on the Grindhouse circuit, but it was also hugely controversial because of its level of violence. And it definitely is a very amateurish movie, but it also gives it a raw authenticity and a documentary-like feel that you just don't see in most horror films. And I know that it has very divisive reactions, but that's why I'm going to defend it on this podcast. So one more thing I just want to say is to avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a podcast, only a podcast, only a podcast.
Hey, he took your bit, Ben. He took your bit.
Order in the court. These are communal bits here. Everyone is entitled to them. I'll remind you that I'm the judge. I'm the judge. I'm the judge. Thank you, Mr. Warder. Prosecution, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
All right. Well, this film opens with the chilling warning that it's based on a true story. And I quote, "The events you are about to witness are true. Names and locations have been changed to protect those individuals still living." So yeah, that's an outright lie. The Amityville Horror is closer to being based on a true story than this thing is. The Last House on the Left is actually based on an Ingmar Bergman film made a decade earlier called The Virgin Spring. And that film is based on some Swedish ballad. And The Virgin Spring is a much better film than this trash. The Virgin Spring was about a Christian maid who had harm wished upon her by a pregnant woman, juxtaposing like purity and impurity, as well as the religious takeover of Christianity in the Nordic lands. So this maid gets raped and murdered by a group of bandits who end up sheltering in the home of the girl's parents unknowingly. And those parents then decide to try and murder this group. Does that sound familiar? Yeah,
Yes.
Beat for beat the plot of The Last House on the Left, without all the interesting religious undertones and examining the guilt that the characters involved feel with the whole episode. You know, the stuff that made it good. We also find out that the title itself is a lie, as the house Mary lives in, where all the action takes place, is actually on the right from where everyone approaches it.
Guilty!
Not only
Order in the court, please. Big if true.
It's the only house on the left or on the right because it's in the middle of nowhere. This house isn't built on the very center of hell either, like the poster suggests. This courthouse is, however, so very soon I hope to relish in the sound of this film being tossed down those fiery depths.
Thank you, Mr. Hessler. Mr. Warder, would you care to respond to some of these criticisms, the seemingly vacuity of the movie compared to this Virgin Spring movie that he mentioned, for example?
Well, first I want to address the inaccuracy in the title. There's actually a good reason for it, because believe it or not, when they first made this movie, they tried it out under some alternate titles like Sex Crime of the Century or Krug and Company Equal Opportunity Destroyers. And they played it in a few drive-ins, and it didn't draw anybody. Nobody came to see it. And apparently one guy in publicity decided, why don't we call it The Last House on the Left? And Wes Craven and Sean Cunningham said, that's ridiculous. What does that have to do with anything? Yet it was just
and they're right.
And it's true, but it was such a catchy sounding title that people started coming to it, and it actually worked. And the fact that here we are, like nearly 50 years later, and a popular podcast has used it as the inspiration for their title shows that it just kind of wound up in the public consciousness. And we already made a reference in our opening statements to the catchphrase, to avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie, only a movie. They used that in the trailer, and it actually worked out pretty well. It actually drew people to see it. I still think it's one of my favorite trailer taglines of all time. But in regards to the fact that your comparison to The Virgin Spring, it's kind of, I don't like to compare these two movies just because they are just so a complete 180 from each other, because it's technically a modernized remake where Wes Craven was taking an old medieval fable and trying to update it to modern times. And The Virgin Spring, of course, it's directed by Ingmar Bergman, so it's technically more well-made and more well-done. But it isn't as interesting to watch, I think, because I'm not really a Bergman fan myself. I'm not really into the kind of the artsy Swedish cinema. So I don't really hold that against the film. I thought it was kind of a clever idea. Just the whole idea of people murdering children and then unknowingly spending the night at the house of their parents who enact violent revenge is a pretty interesting premise. So I thought it was a great idea to try to adapt it and put it as part of a horror film.
But you admit that this film is based on that movie and not a true story, as the opening of this film suggests.
Yeah, that is true. This is not based on a true story, but it also felt like every other horror film in the 1970s claimed they were based on a true story. Because technically even the Texas Chainsaw Massacre does. I mean, it's loosely inspired by the serial killer Ed Gein, but the actual events in the film itself are not true at all. So I don't really hold too much against it, a film produced during the 1970s pretending it's based on a true story.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And Mr. Hassler, if you'd like to proceed to your next point, please.
Sure. My next point is the next not great thing about this movie, the abuse of Sandra Peabody that she experienced on set. Wes Craven recalled the anguish that this character showed on screen may not be all that, quote, not that much of acting, as David Hess was doing some sort of method acting while filming. He bonded with like the group playing the thugs, but he was outright cruel to Peabody as a person. And rape is a very sensitive subject. I'm not quite of the mind that it should never be portrayed on screen, but you still have to handle the matter very delicately, both in your writing and the execution of the filming. During the filming of this film, however, before the character of Krug is about to rape Mary while pawing all over her and such, he glances up at Wes Craven, the director, and asks, "Can I?" And Craven recalled a very look of horror on Sandra Peabody's face, and that's not cool. The fact that it's pretty damn despicable, if you ask me. It's like knowing how traumatized Shelley Duvall was on the set of The Shining. It sort of lessens my appreciation for the methods in which that film was made. Another example is a different actor, Mark Scheffler, freely admits he was getting really sick of working with her, missing her marks and such. So he told Craven just to give him a minute with her. He walked up to her, grabbed her head, and thrust it over the edge of the cliff and told her, "If you don't get this right in the next take, I'm going to throw you over this damn thing. Wes will film it. It'll look great." And again, not cool.
Yeah, Mr. Warder, this is going to be the elephant in the room here. This movie is about sexual violence at the end of the day, and the points Mr. Hassler just brought up, how it affected the actual actors, is that something that we need to take into consideration? Is that something you're looking to defend here?
Well, I cannot defend the way that they treated Sandra Peabody on the set because that sounded pretty horrible, and I know that they would not get away with doing something like this today. I think this was an independent film made during the 1970s with no oversight whatsoever, so they were being kind of cruel to her because they felt that she wasn't doing a good job, and they did take method acting that seriously. They figured, well, if we scare her, then maybe we'll get a best performance out of her. But I do have to admit, though, that on screen, she really does look genuinely terrified, and I think that adds an element of realism to the film because there are some pretty awful scenes of sexual abuse and rape and violence against the two characters, Mary and Phyllis. But that's the thing, is that the movie never actually glamorizes it. And Wes Craven, when he made this, he said that my whole point was I want to make a film that shows violence for how terrible and ugly it really is. I seem to remember him saying that he got inspired when he went to see a spaghetti western where something like 50 people were shot, and it just looked so cartoonish and no one really suffered because of this violence, and people would get shot and just die immediately. So he wanted to show just how terrible real life violence it really is, and how protracted it can really be, and how sometimes you just don't die easily. You go through a horrible, agonizing death. And the actual rape scene in this of Krug, played by David Hess, does to the character Mary, played by Sandra Peabody, I think is one of the most horrifying rape scenes I've ever seen on film, but it's also one of the more emotionally affecting. And because at the very end of it, like, it's brutal. Like, he's literally drooling on her face while he's going through the act, but afterwards she gets back up and kind of walks into the lake, kind of resigned to her fate. And then they cut away to the villains, and these are treated as the most despicable characters in film history, but even they feel bad about how far they have gone. They think they have crossed a major line, so that when they finally shoot Mary and end it, they feel no glory about it, no joy about it. And I think that back in 1972, you never really saw this in a film before, and that's why it was
objection. You saw it in The Virgin Spring, almost that exact scene. She doesn't walk into the lake, but the guilt like these sort of characters feel about the shock of just this moment, and the character sort of walking away a bit was directly from The Virgin Spring.
And to kick it back to you, Mr. Hassler, Robin said that this movie doesn't glorify the violence. Do you agree with that, or do you think that maybe it does?
I don't know that it glorifies the violence. I think it uses it as sort of especially in the advertising, as a way of getting people into the theaters, because either you're going to be like, I can handle it, or you're going to be like so outraged and you have to know what it is you're supposed to be mad at. So I don't know that, like, it's like encouraging people to do this, because I don't think anyone wants to be like those thugs. But I don't know that the execution in it, of course, especially with the method acting involved, was handled with the appropriate level of delicacy.
All right, well, thank you. If you want to move on to your next point here, I think the jury has a lot to consider just from that point of view.
Okay, well, the distress of actress Sandra Peabody is only the start of how unprofessional this whole thing is. And I think the excuse of it being Grindhouse really only gets you so far. This is Craven's first writing directing effort, and man, it shows. The tone in this thing is all over the map. I'm always focusing on things I don't think he wants me to be focusing on, like how the camera lingers on one character for too long, and it's really only because he had like one shot to work with in editing, and you know, he didn't have much to work with. They were like hopping fences into private property to get like these subpar nature shots. It was very guerrilla, no permits, no safety. They did things because no studio exec told them that they couldn't. The studio gave them $90,000. Craven planned to make it for under half that and pocket the rest. The action at the end, people say, is intense. I don't know. There's things like in the shooting of this that just takes me out. Like the dad should have just shot Krug when he had the gun. Instead, he decides he'd rather take him with an ill-advised fist fight. At one point, the dad gets a chainsaw and Krug defends himself all with wooden objects in the house because, hey, chainsaws cut wood, right? We can film that. The chainsaw would probably hit the actor if Krug like took the table and like just sort of slammed the guy, which is what I do. I'd use it as a big shield because, you know, chainsaws don't cut through table like butter. But no, let's have Krug feed the dad with the table with edge first so we can get that chainsaw cutting through it. And lastly, the music in this film is not good. It's just some sort of dude noodling on his bass guitar, which he never had one lesson on, or just hitting one key on his EML Electro Comp 100 synthesizer for a few minutes. But the worst example about how amateurish this whole thing is revolves around the comedic cuts in the music. It has this bouncy song, and it cuts to this and it doesn't match the film in the slightest. I'm just confounded by this choice. Like, you want to know why it's there? Because I found out it's the actor who played Krug. He was a startup musician, and during the audition, he just sort of mentioned to Craven in passing that he was, you know, a low budget musician, and Craven said, "Hey, great, you're doing the music too." So real attention to detail he had in assembling the pieces that make up this film. I was trying to imagine this stupid song in other horror films. Like, imagine Psycho, when Marion is stabbing or getting stabbed by this mysterious figure wielding a knife in the shower, and beep, 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 boom, boom. And now we cut to, and now Marion's blood is floating down the drain. It's the Norman and Mother show. Oh, it's jarring as hell and sloppy filmmaking. It deserves your guilty vote. The prosecution rests.
All right, and may the record show this is yet another episode where Ben was singing. All right, Mr. Warder, you may now present your first exhibit.
Well, I want to defend the music a little bit.
Please do.
Yeah. Well, you talk about that bouncy song. Like, the comedic music actually gets played over the more comedic scenes. I do feel that the music that's played during the horror scenes is a lot better. Like, there's a chase scene through the forest where they play this really effective heartbeat tune, and they play this really sad ballad during the aforementioned scene where Krug kills Mary. And so much, one person who really liked that song was Quentin Tarantino, because he actually reused it during a scene in The Hateful Eight. Apparently, Quentin Tarantino is a huge fan of
objection. Quentin Tarantino makes good films. He does not like good films. I think this has been demonstrated.
Oh, okay.
We'll let the jury decide that one.
Well,
please continue, Mr. Warder.
Yeah, this is when Tarantino grew up. And Eli Roth also likes this film as well. He used a lot of bits from the soundtrack of Last House on the Left and Cabin Fever, and even did a remake of the main title song of this done by David Hess and his sons many years after the fact. But let's see what I was going to say here. But I do think that I'm kind of biased here because I actually own a copy of this soundtrack on CD that's personally autographed by David Hess, because I went to
that's cool.
I went to a special anniversary screening of Last House on the Left here in Ottawa, and the theater was run by a local independent filmmaker named Lee DeMarbra, who had done a movie called Smash Cut with David Hess, and he showed a double feature of it, and Mr. Hess was supposed to be there himself, but he couldn't attend, so he decided to have him hand out autographed copies of the soundtrack instead. So as much as you hate this, I do own it on CD, and I listen to it every now and then because I'm nostalgic for it.
All right. What would be your next point then, Mr. Warder, autographs aside?
Yeah. Well, I will say that I will not deny that this is an amateurish film, and that Wes Craven himself, by his own admission, would say that he had no idea what he was doing. I mean, on the DVD for this movie, he actually does a commentary track with Sean Cunningham, where he kind of pokes fun of himself because he hasn't watched the movie in a long time, and he's like, "Why did I do this?" Yet at the same time, it gives it just an extra authenticity, and I think adds to the horror. Like for the first half hour or so, there really isn't much violence at all, but then they get into the scene in the woods where the gang of criminals takes the two girls out there and decides to sexually abuse and humiliate them before they murder them. And the camera is kind of shaky, and it doesn't look professional, but it feels like a documentary, and I think makes the events so much more horrifying than they intended it to be. It just feels like you're watching almost a snuff film, and it has kind of a raw power that you don't find with most horror films. And there's also an exceptional scene where one of the characters, the other girl, Phyllis, tries to get away and nearly makes it to the road, and then Krug just suddenly jumps out with his machete in the bushes and stops her. And this is the 70s, long before jump scares were a huge thing in horror films. There had only been maybe a few of them up until that point, and I've heard that people who saw the movie back in 1972 like leaped out of their seat when they saw this part. And then they get to the scene where they actually murder Phyllis, and it's painful and protractive, and it feels like a snuff film, yet it just has more raw power than you see in much more polished horror films. Like they made a remake of this in 2009, which is a lot more professional, a lot more well done, but it just kind of feels like a Hollywood product. It just doesn't have the same impact, I feel. It's a decent enough horror film, but I still think this one is a lot more memorable. And I remember when I watched it back in the 90s when I was in high school, I was just blown away by this. I even had mixed feelings, like, is this actually good? I don't know, but it just had this effect on me that was like, wow, I've never had a horror film evoke these emotions in me before.
Earlier,
please
though,
continue.
you said that this film didn't glorify violence, and then you're comparing it to a snuff film, which is all about sort of the glorification of violence.
Well, I'm only saying in the sense that it doesn't make violence look cool or anything like that. Like, I know Wes Craven made the analogy to a spaghetti western where they just shoot people at random or something and you don't feel an effect. And here is one of the first films where you actually show, like, sick people, like, doing horrible violence, and then you see the aftermath. Like, there's a scene after they've killed Mary where the killers have to go into the lake and wash themselves of blood, and then you see them go to the parents' house and try to pass them off as these innocent house guests while dealing with the fact that they murdered their daughter. And then you have this like really uncomfortable dinner scene where they're trying to pass themselves off as sophisticated people, and by the end, like, some of the violence that's inflicted by the parents to get revenge is even worse than some of the violence that they did on the girls. And I think it's kind of an important shot at the end where you don't. It's supposed to be a revenge film where you're supposed to cheer them getting revenge, but at the same time, they look very defeated at the very end. The parents, like, this is going to ruin their lives forever, so they're not feeling any glory over the fact that they got revenge because their two daughters are gone. So it's not a film that makes you feel good about violence.
I was kind of curious about, like, these people, though, like, oh, we're sheltering these guys. They're wearing nice suits. I don't know where they got these nice suits, and they must have clearly smelled like pond water. So I don't know, like, why the alarm bells weren't, like, ringing in the parents' heads as they hosted these guys.
Maybe they smell pond water everywhere down there because they're just so used to it. They're just
fair point. Yeah. I retract that point.
Okay,
there you go.
That tracks.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Warder, do you have anything else you'd like to say in defense of the film?
I do, even though, like, a lot of these actors were unprofessional, I think that a lot of them are really good. I particularly like David Hess, who plays the role of Krug, the lead bad guy. Even though he kind of sounded like a maniac during filming, he does a very effective performance. Like, he's a character with no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and he even looks like a scumbag. He looks like a scary guy, and he's one of the most hateful villains in horror film history. And I actually like the performance by Fred Lincoln, who plays his sidekick Weasel. And it's kind of a funny thing because Fred Lincoln is mostly known for being a porno actor and director. Yeah. And one of his most famous ones was Edward Penis Hands, where he played the title character who had dildos instead of scissors on his hands. That's good. Yeah, I've actually seen the cover art.
That must have been in the 90s, though.
It was in the 90s, yeah. Not
back then. Just in the 60s. It was
just the cover art, though.
It was incredibly trenchant.
Yeah,
Maybe-
just the cover art you've seen, though, for the record. You've
Yeah,
just
just-
seen the cover art.
Just for the record, yeah. Yeah.
The
But
point about Weasel, though, being an adult film actor, his mom, who I think was very Christian and conservative, sort of got over the fact that my kid's doing pornos, I don't like it, but she never got over the fact that he was in this film, that it was so violent.
Yes, he has actually said that before, that he's not ashamed at all at doing all these porns over his life, but he is ashamed about doing this violent fictional film. But I think he's really effective because he's kind of a goofy sidekick a lot of the time, but then he gets into the scene where he stabs Phyllis to death, and he does a very effective job at morphing into a cold-blooded psycho. And I kind of think that he probably could have had a decent career as an actor if he wanted to go that route. And one other thing I wanted to mention, I'm not really using this as a point, but one of the weakest points of this film is that they have a subplot involving these two dumb cops who their car runs out of gas where they're trying to get to the parents' house, and the rest of the film is them trying to get there. But it's kind of a guilty pleasure because one of the cops is played by a young Martin Kove from The Karate Kid and Cobra Kai before he was famous. So it's kind of funny just seeing Sensei Kreese like 10 years before he made The Karate Kid playing a bumbling deputy. So he kind of makes that whole subplot a lot funnier than it had any right to be.
This might be a question for Mr. Rodriguez in the jury, but I kind of wonder if this is like the first film where it's like the police are just so incompetent as like a horror trope, like the police being in the horror film, like if anything, they're going to make this worse because they'll see like the car on the side of the road and they'll be like, yeah, to protect and whatever, and just drive on.
Have you never heard of the Keystone Cops, Ben? I mean,
the Keystone Cops. What year was that?
1920 something.
Yeah, they're all in the 20s.
But those aren't horror movies.
No, they're not. But I'm wondering. This is just the jury. But are there any competent police in films?
In films, yes.
Hey, when does this come out? Because the police were pretty competent in Freddy vs. Jason.
This came out in 1972.
Oh no, I mean this episode. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay,
I'm cutting this whole discussion.
All right.
Good idea. All right. So, Mr. Warder, that's an interesting point on the cops. And Mr. Hassler, do you have anything to add about the kind of the comedic element that the cops introduced?
Well, it just takes me out of the film every time. Like this whole bit with like what's her name, Ada Washington and the chickens. Like this adds nothing to the film. It's not really that funny, and it's just sort of there to pad things. It doesn't really fit in this world. I don't remember what the scene was before it. I think it was it the one with Phyllis getting killed? I think that it cuts to with Ada Washington. And then, the cops literally add nothing to the progression of this story at all. They just show up at the end, like, I guess to clean up the mess, but hey, there's no cars running outside. So, it's going to be kind of a weird walk back to the police station from the middle of nowhere.
I do agree that it's probably not necessary, but it also, I think, kind of helps give you some relief during the film. I mean, just the fact that after, like, Mary's horrible death scene, they kind of cut to the cops, and it's a pretty stupid scene, but it kind of prevents you from feeling depressed throughout the entirety of the film. And one other thing I do like is there's a scene after the killers wind up at the house where Weasel has a dream sequence where the parents are standing over him with a chisel and they try to chop out his teeth. And I think that's kind of an interesting foreshadowing for Nightmare on Elm Street, because that's Wes Craven would make like scary nightmares part of his forte. And he's even said that he's had people come up to him over the years and say, I don't really like Last House on the Left all that much, but the scene, the dream sequence involving the dentistry is awesome.
But you know what Weasel does right after he wakes up from that dream where the parents attack his teeth?
He gets his dick bitten off. That's what he does.
No. Before that, he comes on to this wife. Like, he just had nightmares about this woman, like, killing him. And he's like, okay, but yeah, you know what? Let's go cheat on your husband. Come on. What do you say? You wanna?
It's kind of interesting. Craven says that he talked to a dream specialist, and he says that two of the most common dreams that people have are vagina dextrata, losing your dick in someone's vagina, and that second place is losing your teeth, and that it's kind of a payoff to that. The second worst dream turns into the first worst dream, except it happens in reality.
And we're going to have to do a show of hands here for... No, let's not. All right. So that was a very interesting point. Is there anything else you would like to say, Robin?
Just say that I do acknowledge that this is not a film that everyone will love, but I still think that when I revisit it today, that even though I do acknowledge these flaws when I see them, I get into the film every time, and it just has the same effect on me that it did when I watched it as a teenager. And I think even if you don't really like the film, you can kind of respect it, the fact that it was doing stuff back in 1972 that no one else was, and that it even predated the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as one of the very first horror films to use a chainsaw as a weapon. So it was doing a lot of things that horror films weren't doing at that time, and I think that's why it's remembered so much by horror fans nearly 50 years later.
All right, and you'll rest on that?
Yep.
All right, well, thank you. Both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Big Ben, you may begin.
While certainly not a pleasant film to watch, the only reason we're even talking about it is because of the advertising campaign. It promised a film so utterly disgusting that you'd have to keep repeating to yourself that it's only a movie to stay coherent. Fact is, other films have done this and have done it better and had bigger budgets and more competent people on staff. But because of this lie they sold you, you saw it because you thought, hey, they can't scare me, or you were worried about the direction the country was going and you had to see it so you knew what you were talking about, making it even more popular because the first group just wants to see it to spite you. So Wes Craven, he has become a talented filmmaker, and this film is only interesting because it's his first. But gentlemen of the jury, I implore you not to give it an innocent vote because of him. Watch Nightmare on Elm Street. Watch Scream. You can watch this too, but do so while calling it what it is. Amateur Hour, the movie.
Thank you, Big Ben. Mr. Warder, please present your closing argument.
Well, I won't disagree that it's amateur hour in times, but I also think that the amateurish actually adds to the film. And I almost think it's kind of like an interesting, strangely inspiring story that these people who really didn't have any knowledge of filmmaking just decided to make one and figure that maybe it would play in a few theaters and no one would ever see it. Yet, for some reason, without even realizing it, they broke several taboos, broke new ground, and it wound up becoming a very successful, if controversial, horror film. And it's worth noting that even though most of the critics hated it, one person who actually championed it was Roger Ebert, who said that he went in there expecting just a standard exploitation film and said it was about 4 times as good as he'd expected to be, just because it had like a profound raw power to it that you just don't see anymore. And of course, it propelled the careers of Wes Craven and Sean Cunningham, and they became like very influential figures in horror. And I just think you'll go into it. I can never predict anyone's reaction when you go into it, if they're going to love it or they're going to hate it. But I definitely think it's worth giving it a try just to check it for its influence on cinema, and also the fact that it's doing a lot of things that people just were not doing in 1972. And it has just a lot of memorable, in spite of its flaws, it has a lot of memorable standalone scenes, like Mary's death scene and the dream sequence, and a very effective climax too, I think, when the parents finally get revenge on the killers. And so I definitely would recommend this. I do like the remake that came out in 2009, but I think that this one works a lot better.
All right. Thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Rob Maynard, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, and Mr. The Last Ryan on the Luis Rodriguez, you have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of the sin of being a bad movie, and will therefore be condemned to the depths of movie hell. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
I actually hope the film is not guilty. Devil might be a bit peeved after me after I was drinking and throwing my empty beer bottles down the hell pit, and I need to get back on his good side.
That was a mouthful there.
Why are you drinking on the job, bailiff?
After hours.
Oh, okay.
He lives in the courtroom, of course.
Oh, right.
All right. An interesting case, a very controversial film. But hopefully it fosters some great discussion here. So, Ryan, I would like to know your thoughts.
So, I went into this not wanting to watch this at all. In fact, I was mad that I had to sit down and watch this fucking movie.
I know.
But by the time it was over, I wasn't as mad as I thought I would be. I was more just bummed. Like, really, really bummed. This is I think it's hypocritical in its exploitation, in that it's supposedly, according to the defense, this was supposed to reflect the ugly nature of violence, but then you use that advertising campaign.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like you got to pick one side. You can't do both. You can't make violence the most reprehensible thing and then sell it on the violence.
I wonder who makes the campaign, though, right? Did the filmmakers make the film, sell it to somebody, and somebody went, well, here's the best way to market it? You know,
in this case, they were involved, as far as I understand.
Okay, all right, no, fair. I just don't know. No,
it's fine. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm bouncing back and forth on this one.
Was there something you really liked about the movie?
I think that it shows a demonstrable amount of skill throughout. Like, it's clear that Wes Craven is going to become somebody who will have an eye later on. Mm-hmm. I think that the violence and the sexual violence in particular is unsettling. It's unpleasant, but at the same time, as the defense said, it does not glorify that stuff in the moment, which is admirable. Even though I don't really think that the movie feels very atonal, especially with the music. Like, it seems like whoever did the music did not understand the point of the film, and kind of undercuts that a lot. Same with the comic relief, which is always bullshit, but especially here. So I think that this is a movie basically at war with itself, is what I'm trying to say. I'm just not very artful in saying it.
I think you did a good job. Mr. Schlender, what did you think?
It's interesting, when this movie came out in 1972, and like Robin was saying, it was breaking a lot of the rules just because Cunningham and Craven didn't really know the rules, right? And so you have to say something about the time period. And I just wonder if there's a certain generation that looks at this movie and what it kicked off, and they have reverence for it, the same way our generation might look at like the Blair Witch Project for what that kicked off. But you show it to newer generations, like the Generation Z types aren't going to really find Blair Witch scary the same way we didn't really find Last House on the Left scary, despite what it did for their respective genres at the time.
That's the problem, though, because I think that Last House on the Left kicked off a lot of bad movies. A lot of bad movies that learned the wrong lesson from this.
Well, I think Blair Witch did too.
It did, but this kicked off a bunch of really distasteful, terrible exploitation.
Do you think this movie is distasteful? Do you think this movie's distasteful, though? Yeah, see, that's where I'm coming down on it as well, though. It's just, it's hard to see the value in a movie like this. You know, that's where I'm coming down. And I'm glad we had Robin on to defend it, because you have to talk about a movie like this very carefully, because it's such a sensitive subject, you know, and you want to put the best case forward that you can. But at the end of the day, you know, there's a lot wrong with it. It is very amateurish, and the violence, it keeps saying it's not being glorified, but then you have this ad campaign, and the reason people watch this movie is in hopes that it will shock the senses, you know. And I don't know if there's an educational value there, the same way like there isn't for like public executions. You know, it's just this part of that cultural rot, you know, the bread and circuses, and this is a piece of that. So what are you thinking, Rob?
There are totally some things I really don't like about this movie. And as far as you saying, I don't know if that it would scare. I mean, I'm not Gen Z, right? I'm millennial, but I saw this in high school and it didn't scare me. Nothing scares me, but it disturbed me. It stuck with me. And that's
which is a lot the point. It's not trying to scare you. It's trying to get your cockles up.
Right. It's kind of trying to scar you a little bit. And that's kind of where I like a lot of these like video nasty exploitation films, is they're just total, the pure audacity of them is often just something that sticks with you, that haunts you. And I think that's something that you know, like no 2009 remake is ever going to capture, even if it had a bigger budget, even if it had a director with more experience. You know, that's not really the point. What I do hate about this movie, I hate the music. God, I hate the music. because it is almost always wrong, except for the aforementioned like chase through the wood music, and maybe the one that plays as she walks into the water. But like, they've kidnapped some girls and put them in their trunk, and there's a kazoo playing like a happy little jaunty tune, and it's so, and I don't like the comic relief cops either. I like showing that the police are incompetent and that they can't help in the situation, but like they shouldn't be playing for laughs. Exactly.
You know what, too? And I wonder, you have to wonder if like Wes Craven was inspired by something like The Weekend by Godard, because that movie does a great juxtaposition of like violence and absurdity. And if he was going for that, you could kind of see how he was going for it, and it falls very short. You know,
And
The
that's
Weekend
the thing, 'cause
is.
I don't think he was
yeah.
going for that at all.
See, I don't think he was either. I think it's kind of like a retroactive fit
Yeah.
to it, is that
It's
people
something
can
that
say
film
something.
Twitter would come up with, but it's not actually the case.
Yeah, like I don't think it like we just judge what we're seeing on the screen, you know. And The Weekend came out like 5 years before this, so there was a template, you know. And
But, I mean, I guarantee
Yeah.
you he's never seen it. I mean,
At
he's
the
not
time,
alive,
yeah.
but I hadn't seen it at the time.
But I
Yeah,
think
I
there is some side of that. He did have, you know, as Ryan said, some stuff with a good eye, right? Like when she goes into the water and starts sinking, I know there's been comparisons to that painting of Ophelia.
He's always had high-minded intentions, often in some of the most low-minded stuff that he's done, but
yeah.
that doesn't really like scrub over the worst stuff in there.
Mm-hmm. I think what this does very well is I think the Killers are a very, very compelling band. They're hard to take your eyes off of. They are scary. They're scary in the way that they could actually blend in rather normally. I mean, they get the girls to drop their defenses very easily before they grab them. They're
Which I
able to
don't
pass as very normal. I mean, maybe. I mean, that Sheffield guy, he showed it too. They can kind of turn that switch on and off of being charming and being nice. I mean, they have to, otherwise they'd never gotten into the parents' house, right? They have to know how to act normal when they need to.
Yeah, I mean, the girls walked up to the dude asking for weed. So, I mean, the fact that they looked shady and they were going to get weed, I mean, like, that's pretty, you know, I'd imagine that'd be par for the course in 72.
Yeah. It was grass, by the way.
I think, I gotta get some of that grass, man. You know, I think that's the thing.
Let's start locking in some verdicts here soon.
I was just gonna say, I just think the movie is just such a product of its times. I could see in 72 why someone like Ebert would say like, oh, this was actually surprisingly good and subversive and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is we're watching it in 2021. I think there are better movies out there that accomplish the same message that Craven says he was going for. I'd have a lot more respect for him if he said, no, this was just exploitation. We wanted to get pretty girls' tits on the screen and we did it. Here you go. But, you know, that's not what he's saying. So I think it fails in intention. The music is awful.
As a small counter, the rape scenes are not super sexualized or anything, you know, like, yes, there's the shower scene in the beginning where they do that, but I mean, the rape scenes aren't shot or filmed or directed at all to be sexy.
Yeah, they're not male gazy.
They're not.
They're stark.
Which I couldn't remember how they were going to be, but actually I was pleasantly surprised that they weren't, as Ryan said, super male gazy. This is not I Spit on Your Grave.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all.
And with all that said, guilty.
Okay. Ryan, where are you coming down? I mean, I know
not
you felt
guilty.
bummed. You're leaning not guilty, because I know you said you felt bummed at the end. I think that is.
Yeah, I was legitimately bummed out.
Yeah,
that I had
I think
to
you're
watch
supposed
that.
to be.
Yeah.
This kind of falls into that rape revenge genre, but the person who got raped doesn't get to get revenge, and I don't think the parents feel any better when they get it either. I do think that this is part of a horror legacy. The content of the film is obviously horrible. I do think that's the point. The music is unfortunate, but I think that this is meant to horrify and disgust and disturb. And I think it's successful in those things, despite some of those other flaws. So I am also going to go not guilty.
Boo.
Well, your puritanical values have lost out again, Schlenzo. Let's get out there and tell that.
Puritanical, I just want a good movie.
Let's just go out there and tell that moderately handsome judge.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of The People versus The Last House on the Left, 1972, we find the defendant not guilty of being a bad movie.
Boo. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm the judge. How inappropriate. The verdict is so rendered. The Last House on the Left is hereby exonerated of the sin of being a bad movie. However, I hereby order it to save 50 Halle Berrys for utilizing a kazoo in a score of a film with such disturbing subject matter. Court is adjourned.
Yay.
It's on probation for the kazoo, so that's what.
Yeah,
It's on
man.
thin ice. It's on thin ice.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Mumbly Mumbleson reporting to you live from outside the Reels of Justice. Big Ben Hassler, would you care to share your thoughts on the jury's verdict?
Yeah, I'm mixed, Mumbly, but I was very mixed about the film too. It's hard to come down on one side or the other. I get it. There's as much bad things that you could say about it for being disturbing, and you can also look at like these bad guys and see that they're not monsters. That like they don't. They're being with this list of like Jason and Freddy and whoever, and then there's this guy who's normal and he's scary. So it's a mixed film. I would not recommend people see this unless they absolutely are scholars of horror. But given that, it's a mixed day here at court.
Thank you, I appreciate what you have to say, and I love you. And here comes Robin Warder. Excuse me, can we get a word of how you feel about today's verdict?
Yes, I'm happy and pleasantly surprised by the verdict because, like I said, whenever I introduce this film to some people, I can never predict how they're going to react. Some people hate me for it, and some people are appreciative for me introducing it to it. But it's just that kind of film that brings out reactions to people, and I guess that could be taken as a compliment, that it's not a film where you're going to be indifferent to it or feel bored by it. You're just going to have one positive reaction or a negative reaction, and I'm just happy that on today it fell with a positive reaction.
Thank you very much. I'll happily tell you that even though I'm a new character, I hate you very much for making me watch this. That's all we have from the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis.
I like Mumbly.
I love Mumbly.
What does he write for?
He writes for the Comical Gazette.
Oh, all right.
I love Mumbly. I hope we get
Mumbly's
more
great.
Mumbly.
Yeah.
Mumbly is wonderful.
He's right up there with the elf, I think.
Yeah. Robin, great job.
Well done, sir.
I know
Well
this
done.
choice
Thank you.
was divisive, but
Controversial.
but hopefully not everyone's going to agree with our verdict. And we can
And I don't
definitely
expect them to,
accept
and I don't
that.
hope that they do. I hope that they
I
make
can
up their
think
own
of
minds.
like so many other guests we've had on this show that would not have been able to defend this movie well, and I'm glad that we got Robin to do it because
Robin, I know you said
it
you
was really way to
saw
way
this
to
in
do
high
it.
school. Do you feel like this film led to? Did you already have a fascination with true crime, or did something like this kind of get you fascinated in that subject?
Well, I had already watched Unsolved Mysteries when I think I was 10 years old, so I was into true crime before I started watching Last House on the Left. But this was one of the first films I remember where I was like really, really shocked by the level of violence and just seeing the worst of humanity. I think I watched this around the same time I was introduced to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Hills Have Eyes, a lot of the classics from the 70s. So it was kind of a wild year for me getting my horror education, and this was the one that really stood out.
Yeah, Hills Have Eyes, another Wes Craven one.
Quite the menagerie.
Yeah. I don't think I watched this in our horror film class in college, but we had a whole section on rape revenge, and I know we did I Spit on Your Grave, and I know we did like Miss 45 and a couple others. So it's not a genre for people to watch lightly, and it's very, very touchy because you, like we said, you got to watch out for that male gaze. You can't make a film from that perspective, which is why the new I Spit on Your Graves are even worse.
Oh, I found out that they did a sequel to one of the remakes that's 2.5 hours long. Like, who would want to sit through 2.5 hours of that?
Is it
Oh
two
my
or
God.
three?
It's a really long one. I can't remember which one it was, but it came out in 2019. And when I saw the running time that it was 2.5 hours, I was just shocked. And it was the same.
That's a lot of spitting right there.
and I think it was the same director who made the original film, and he actually brought back some of the characters from the original. So it's like, wow, talk about self-indulgent.
Yeah. Anyway, speaking of self-indulgent, what's been up with you? What have you been up to?
Still releasing my podcast. I passed my 5-year anniversary back in February. I'm hoping to attend CrimeCon UK in London 1 month after we record this. I'm scheduled to be on Podcast Row. I've done all the CrimeCon events in the United States, and this is the first in the United Kingdom, but it all depends on travel restrictions, because I hear that there are stricter restrictions for quarantine for Canada than they are for the United States at this moment. So it's still up in the air whether I'm going to make the trip. But I hope I can, because I haven't been to the UK since I think I was 6 or 7 years old.
What are the dates of the CrimeCon?
September the 25th and 26th.
Well, that's in the past now.
Okay. So hopefully we have a happy ending.
So I hope you had a real. I hope you did go at Future Robin, and I hope you had a really great time, and they let you go through all you want.
And I hope they let you come back too.
That would be a plus. That would absolutely be a plus. And I know you said it earlier, but tell us the name of your podcast again for people who may not know.
The Trail Went Cold. It has been around for 5.5 years, and it covers a different unsolved mystery and cold case every single week. And it takes a lot of cases that were featured on the TV show Unsolved Mysteries. I kind of do new, updated versions of them with more information. So I like to describe myself as Unsolved Mysteries in podcast form.
That's a great way to describe it. Ever show up?
I wish. I have taken pictures of myself in a Robert Stack trench coat, and I also own a Robert Stack candle. So as you can tell, I'm an aficionado, and I only wish he was still alive to hear my podcast.
Yeah,
I bet he would love it. And don't forget too, you got the Path Went Chili that you do, which is the group show.
Yes, I do. I just started it a couple months ago, and I have 2 co-hosts, Jules and Ashley, and we take a lot of the cases that I covered on The Trail Went Cold, and we revisit them. And because we have 3 people now, we have in-depth discussions about the cases, and in some of them, it's interesting. I would have covered them on The Trail Went Cold maybe like 2016, 2017, but now when I get down to talk about them now, it's like, wow, I have different thoughts now, or I'm totally looking at this in a different light. So I almost like to call it The Trail Went Cold Director's Cut, where I get the chance to do my original episodes again.
You know, and it's nice too, because sometimes your co-host will ask the questions, like when you're listening to The Trail Went Cold, you just want to ask a question. And thankfully, though, you're very accessible. So I always email you whenever I have a question. And then eventually you came on my show, which was awesome. So here we are.
Your show.
I am the host.
That's right. Dylan is the only host of this show.
Fuck
you other guys. It's all about Dylan.
One host. So, Robin, we always ask for a recommendation of a movie that you think our listeners should check out. So, in honor of the Hell on Reels, what is a horror movie that you think people should check out?
Well, I'm going to give a movie and also an example of a YouTube clip you can check out afterwards. But the movie I want to talk about is, we just mentioned it, was Wes Craven's follow-up to The Last House on the Left, and that's The Hills Have Eyes, which came out in 1977. And I even think that even if you don't like The Last House on the Left, you will like The Hills Have Eyes, because he's got 5 years more experience now. He's a lot more professional and polished, yet it still is pretty low budget and has that grainy documentary quality. But in case you're not familiar with the plot, it involves a family going on a camping trip who are stranded out in the desert and preyed upon by a demented family who lives out there and kill tourists. And it has the same motifs where some of the family members are killed and the survivors get revenge and wind up being more vicious than the villains. But it doesn't have any rape scenes. It has an attempted rape, but it's not anything as disturbing as The Last House on the Left. And it doesn't have like cheesy music or any of that stuff. So you can tell he's kind of honing his craft, and he would eventually go on to bigger
and
things.
not hiring David Hess.
Yeah, not hiring David Hess. But
hey, David Hess was great in Swamp Thing, which is also a Wes Craven movie.
Yeah, it was. And hilariously enough, the second YouTube clip I was going to talk about is from a movie starring David Hess called The House on the Edge of the Park, which came out in the 1980s, is an obvious ripoff of Last House on the Left, as you can tell by the title. And it's directed by Ruggero Deodato, who did Cannibal Holocaust, so you know it's got some disturbing violence. But it's not a good movie, but if you get a chance, go on YouTube and watch the clip of David Hess's death scene, because the hero shoots him in the balls, and they have like a 30-second slow motion shot where they show a close-up of David Hess's face screaming, and he gives the most hilarious look. He just kind of goes, "Ah!" before he falls over in slow motion into the pool, and they hold on this for like 30 seconds. It's probably the best scene I've ever seen of someone ever getting shot in the balls in a movie. So check it out on YouTube. You won't be disappointed.
And it's a long list, baby.
I thought it was going to be a close-up of his balls, but...
I thought that's where we were going with this, too. Much better the other way.
Yeah,
Big Ben.
They do show the close-up of his balls, but then they linger on his face, and that's what makes it worthwhile.
Very good.
Big Ben, what is your recommendation?
I'm going to give my first non-J horror recommendation today, and that's a film that has the same concept of Last of the House on the Left, and that's 2008's The Strangers, starring Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman. Like Last House on the Left, it revolves around innocent people who are just have the bad luck of running into people who are evil and crazy. They hurt people just simply because they can, because the film knows that people are the worst. But horror films like this do have an edge over supernatural fare, because this thing could happen conceivably to you. How 100% positive are you that there's not some dude looking at you right now?
Oh no!
Oh no!
Take a look around. I believe you can still check it out on Netflix or rent it just about anywhere. Just don't get too invested into figuring out who Tamara is, because they never tell you.
Go away, man in the window. Go. Get out of here. Hey,
That's
bad
Torgo.
man.
But Ryan, you're on the 3rd floor.
That's even
Well,
more
close enough.
impressive.
I'm on the second, but he climbed up. I have a ladder here. I probably should take that ladder down.
Oh, God.
Schlenzo, what is your recommendation?
My recommendation?
Yes.
My recommendation today is a horror movie from 2013 called Billy Club. 4 childhood friends reunite on the anniversary of the murders of their Little League friends and coach. The movie swings for the fences, and it hits a home run. The murderer is dressed up like a demonic catcher and is just great design and sweet to look at. So if you like horror, baseball, and digging through a disturbing past, you don't want to strike out, see this one.
Boo.
I love it.
Boo!
Yeah, see,
I believe it's streaming on Amazon Prime.
people don't boo Dylan enough. They boo me all the time.
They should boo me more.
You
I'm
both
terrible.
deserve it. Shut up.
Fashionable. Hey, not me. Ryan, you may go next.
This is going to make Rob really mad, but my recommendation is not a horror movie, but it's the movie that helped soothe my anxious brain after watching this week's spooky trial. It's Jacques Demy's musical follow-up to the almost experimental Umbrellas of Cherbourg, a more conventional take on the material, 1967's The Young Girls of Rochefort, where Cherbourg was a straight bittersweet melodrama in which all the actors simply sing all of their dialogue. Rochefort is a full-blown Minnelli-esque musical with dance numbers and actual songs, and it has Gene fucking Kelly. How can you resist? Like many of Demy's best movies, you can find The Young Girls of Rochefort on the Criterion Channel.
When you say Minnelli-esque, do you mean Liza Minnelli?
I mean her father, Vincent Minnelli.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense.
And Gene Kelly plays a demonic catcher, right, Ryan?
Sure, if that's the movie you want to see.
And he starts
sure,
hacking up. Actually, that is the movie I want to see now. Gene Kelly,
No one suspects Gene Kelly.
stomping people to death as a.
Well, I mean, we know he does that.
Yeah.
Come on, it's Gene Kelly.
So I'll send us on home here. Last House on the Left, as I mentioned, was a video nasty, right? Which meant like for a time in the 80s and 90s in the UK, the filmmakers and distributors and retailers could actually be prosecuted for selling these movies like this. And a lot of these films had to be cut in order to even pass any kind of standard. So the Video Nasty List is a great source to find all the most wretchedly violent and depraved exploitation films out there. So I'm going to recommend another entry on the list that I saw recently, 1980's Don't Go in the House. It's about a deeply disturbed man obsessed with burning his innocent victims alive, which stems from his youth when his mother repeatedly tried to burn the evil out of him. The deaths by immolation are pretty graphic, and its theme is centered around child abuse. It's out there if you want to find it. It's on Tubi and Pluto TV, but viewer discretion is advised.
Now, Rob, I have a question.
Sure.
Is this house, is it on the left or the right?
I mean, that all depends on where you're approaching it. I mean,
Thank you
all-
for that
Well-
non-answer.
Okay, so as we start to wind things down here, we'd like to remind our listeners that if you leave us an iTunes review and send us a screenshot of it on either Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook with the hashtag ROJ Reviews, you will be entered into an upcoming raffle for some really cool Reels of Justice swag.
Robin, don't you think people should leave us some nice reviews?
Oh, definitely, yes. If you leave a bad review, I will send you a copy of the Last House on the Left soundtrack, and you don't want me to do that for you.
You do not.
So if you put the
listen to
bad
him.
comment, make sure to put your address and how much postage it would require to come from Canada.
Exactly. And with that, we're all out of show for the week, but we want to thank our guest, Robin Warder, for joining us. Thank you so much again, Robin.
My pleasure. I thought I would do something different this time. Last time I did Ready to Rumble, a really dumb lightweight comedy, so I thought I would go really dark this time. But it was a lot of fun.
Congratulations,
Yeah.
sir. You succeeded.
That is some whiplash.
We will meet in the middle on the next one, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Any which way but loose. But we hope to have you back again sometime in the future. And we hope that everyone else would join us as well as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Count it.
Depravity.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.